this theosophical classic that is at the feet of the Master, we are going to explore, as Tim said, the third chapter of this little book, which, as you have seen in the previous very interesting talks, is a very deep book. As both Tim and David said, the language is pretty simple and straightforward, but the things that are said in the book are things that affect the core of what we are and how we act. The first qualification, the context of the book is that these are characteristics that the awakening of the spiritual consciousness brings to a person. So this is a description of how a spiritual person perceives the world and how the person acts in the world. And these are not commandments in the sense that rules written down by some deity that we have to follow. These are the characteristics that naturally have to awaken, to develop in ourselves. So they may serve as a pointer, or they may serve as a guide to pay attention to these areas in our development, in ourselves, and to see how we are relating to it. Of course, it is easier to speak in a language, in a direct language, like saying, do this, don't do that. But from a spiritual point of view, we shouldn't take them, as I said, just like rules. These things should flourish naturally in ourselves, and these are just for us to keep them in mind and to work with these things. So the Master described to Krishnamurti these two qualifications first that we have seen in the past weeks. One was the discernment between the real and the unreal, which should produce the ability to let go of many things that usually trouble our lives just because we don't understand how things are. As we understand life, as we understand ourselves, then life becomes naturally simpler. And out of this discernment comes desirelessness, which means that we don't crave so much for things that are out there. As Tim explained last week, it's not that we have to reject enjoyments, because joy and sorrow are part of life and they will come no matter what. But what we have to get to is a relationship with life, with deep understanding, so that we don't cling to things and we can live in the present with whatever comes, have that experience, and then move on without trying to reject or be clinging to something or regretting something that happened. So these are two basic aspects in which we should be working, we should be paying attention to how we are relating to life. And now there come 6 points which are more practical. In a sense, they are more specific. These 2 points that we have seen in the previous weeks are like more general. They should be the background of our life. And these 6 points, I think, are more specific, and they have a particular purpose. As also Tim and David said, these qualifications were described in the Hindu literature, but in a slightly different way. So these 6 points of conduct are also in the book written by Shankaracharya, and they are also used in yoga. But some of them are really different. Some of them, the approach is, I think in this point, in this particular chapter, we can see a difference in approach between this theosophical approach and the Hindu approach to these points of conduct. These virtues that are suggested for us to nourish are self-control of the mind, self-control of our action, tolerance, cheerfulness, one-pointedness, and confidence. The first one, self-control of our mind, it points out to a mind that is calm and unruffled, a mind that doesn't fall into impatience, or a mind that is able to go through life with a steadiness, with a stillness that gives courage to face things in life. It is related to courage, and in the book it is said that this implies courage. Because if we observe our minds, many times the restlessness of our minds are produced by anxiety, by not knowing what is coming, and we never know what is coming. We never know the future. But there is a constant activity in ourselves to try to secure the future. So this relationship to the future that is based on anxiety produces a constant disturbance in our minds. Whenever we have a calm mind and we have confidence in the future, at least for a short time, maybe some good news we received, and then we don't feel anxious about the future for a little while, and you can see how the mind naturally gets into a state of poise, into a state of stillness. So the idea is that we should give more space to the silent mind, to a calm mind. Silent in the sense not that there are no thoughts there. Silent in the sense that is watching, that is not trying to manipulate life constantly. Of course, we have to decide to do things, we have to act in the world, and we are going to see that that's one of the qualifications also. But life is much bigger than what we, with our personal will, can manipulate. One of the points that we are going to see also, it implies confidence in the process of life. So all these points you'll see are interrelated to generate a single attitude which opens the door for the spiritual perception. So the idea is, let us try to give space to this calm mind. When something comes, when we have to face something in life, let us try to face it with what we were discussing last week, with discernment. Let us try to examine it, to understand it. Let us try to not to cling so much to things. When there is this craving for something or this rejection for something, let us watch ourselves and let go. As we watch ourselves, we can relax and we can let go. And with this general attitude, we start giving room to this calm mind. The study of spirituality and the spiritual laws, so to say, also help a lot in how we face life. There is a quote that is probably my favorite quote in the book that says, "The Master teaches that it doesn't matter in the least what happens to a person from outside. Sorrows, troubles, sicknesses, losses, all these must be as nothing to him and must not be allowed to affect the calmness of his mind. They are the result of past actions. And when they come to you, you must bear them cheerfully, remembering that all evil is transitory, and that your duty is to remain always joyous and serene. They belong to your previous lives, not to this, and you cannot alter them. So it is useless to trouble about them. Think rather of what you are doing now, which will make the events of your next life, and because that is what you can alter. Remember that this is being taught to a person that was a disciple of the Master. So that means a person with a deep spiritual evolution. Probably most of us will not be able to embrace this thing in its totality. But as I said, we shouldn't look at this as a rule and therefore feel that if we are not following this rule, then we are failing, or we are not good enough, or we are doing something wrong. This is how a mature person reacts. The mature person knows that everything that comes to our life is already an effect. It's an effect from the past. And it has a deep purpose. It has a purpose of awakening us to reality. It has also a purpose of purification. It's like if we have to go to surgery, we know that surgery will be painful. Somebody will be actually piercing through our skin. We will have a period to recover. There will be pain. We will be uncomfortable, but we will be cured of something that was afflicting us. So we willingly go through all the trouble because we know there is something that has to be removed, and I have to go through this because this is what is going to prepare a better future. So as we grow in our understanding of life, we can start perceiving that life is like that. The things that happen to us that may bring suffering, they have a purpose. And they are the foundations for a life that is more fulfilling, or truer, or closer to reality. So as we understand this, we can get closer to that attitude. And we can have this calm mind to face things. Of course, the suffering will be there. It doesn't mean that we don't have to, that suffering is wrong. When we go through a surgery, the suffering is there. Now, when we are recovering, we can be cheerful about this, although the pain is there, or we can be, very crabby. Being crabby doesn't help us, doesn't help people around, doesn't help anything. So the doctor probably would say, okay, try to take it, as cheerfully as possible. I know that there is pain there, but try to go through this cheerfully. That is what the Master is saying. So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't feel sorrow if we are going through a hard time. We will most probably feel sorrow, but our attitude can be one of, accepting it and trying to go through it as well as possible, or resenting the situation and resisting it and all that. So the Master says also there in that point that we should try not to let ourselves be drawn in depression, because we infect other people with depression. When we are sad, or depressed, sadness, joyfulness, they are part of life. But if we are really depressed, people who love us around, they are worried, we make their lives more difficult, and also we are emanating all that to the atmosphere, the psychic atmosphere of the world. So we should try not to let ourselves be drawn in this attitude. But sometimes, again, it is not possible. This is our ideal. Let us get as close as possible to this, because this is good for us and for everybody around, but without any feeling of guilt or failure if we can't. Also, this control of the mind implies that we should fix our mind in whatever we are doing. The Master says, don't let your mind just wander when you are doing something. And as we frequently say, if we are doing the dishes, let us focus all our attention in doing the dishes. If we are walking, let us enjoy the walk and let us be aware of everything around. Let us be aware of the walking instead of having our minds going everywhere. Because this ability to fix our minds in whatever we are doing makes our mind, puts certain order in our minds. Our minds are like anything in nature. Anything in nature acquires certain habits. And our minds, if we are constantly putting our minds in many things at the same time, there is a habit to do that after a while. And that's usually not the best situation or the best state to perceive the depth of life. If we want to perceive the depth of life, we need a mind that is serene, that is able to focus on something. So the Master says you should be able to focus your mind and not be a victim of the restlessness of your mind. And also the Master says that we should use our mind to help other people, the power of thought. As you are going to see, the Master doesn't say just think well of other people. He talks also about doing things for the good. But he says there is a power in our thoughts, and we could use that power of thought to send good thoughts to people that may be in distress. And if you have done that regularly, you probably have had the experience that sometimes people really actually feel a relief when you are sending the thoughts. So it's something interesting to explore. It's not a superstition or a nice idea. So the Master says, why don't you, if you meditate in the morning or if you have some quiet time, why don't you employ a couple of minutes to send good thoughts to somebody that needs it, or to the world in general? So this is more or less the idea of the first virtue, this virtue of a calm mind, to generate the courage to face life and all that we were talking about. So the next point is self-control in action. And the Master says, in the same way that you should be the master of your mind, I don't know if saying the master of your mind or you shouldn't be the slave of your mind. In the same way, your actions should be what you want to do, not what your body or your desires want to do. The Master says there should be a constant activity in good works, but in a very wide way. Good works, the book says, anything that is unselfish, no matter how little or how big, is a good work. So the idea is that we shouldn't be simply thinking about spirituality and doing good to others, but actually nourishing an attitude of service, an attitude of being a center of help. You know, we can be a center, we can ask ourselves, what kind of influence do I exert on people around, on the environment around? I am a source of conflict, I am a source of sadness, I am a source of help, just without any judgment, in the sense, just to know yourself. Of course, we are a source of many different things, mixed, and that will always be the case. But if we examine our lives, how do I relate to people? What is my interaction? What am I communicating to people? If we observe that, then we can start putting more attention to the positive aspects of our interaction. And that is to do good works. You know, to go and do something that may lift a little the burden of life to the person that is next to us is part of the good work. It's part of being not so self-centered in our needs and being unaware that our actions can be making life more difficult to others. And also the Master says that although we are seeking a spiritual life, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fulfill our material duties as perfectly as possible. Because there is a tendency that spiritual people think, well, this is an illusion, so I'm not going to pay attention to what happens here. The Master says, if you are really, really trying to lead a spiritual life as much as possible, well, try not to take new worldly duties. Because if you take a duty, you have to fulfill it better than other people. The Master says if you are trying to be a spiritual person, you should act better than other people, even if you are sweeping the floor. So the idea is that we can try to accommodate our life little by little in the direction that we think is the best one, but we cannot deny or disregard the duties that we already have. And part of our training, part of our development, is to fulfill these duties as best as possible. Because that's our training. Many times people say, I wish I could do something really meaningful for the world, and what am I doing in my life? I'm affecting humanity so little. And they are expecting for a great opportunity to help in a way that makes a big impact. But all the little things, besides the fact that thought is false, all the little things that we are doing in our daily life are the ones that will train us to be able eventually, if the opportunity comes, to do something big in the right way. Because the bigger the action, the bigger the consequences, the bigger the responsibilities. So in my daily life, if almost nobody depends on me, or it's a very small circle, if I made a mistake, well, it may not have a lot of consequences. But if you are doing something that affects a lot of people, then your mistake may produce very bad consequences. So it is through the little things, learning how to do perfectly the little things, that we are developing the skill to do big things in the right way. So even if our ideal is to eventually do something big for humanity, and many times there is only the ego behind that, but even if that is our ideal, we should be trying to do perfectly whatever little things we are doing. That's our training. Then the other point that the Master talks about is tolerance. So he talks about tolerance at the level of other people's beliefs and other people's ways. He says first, if you are going to be tolerant, you have to get rid yourself of your bigotry and your superstition. You have to be able to have an open mind. Because remember again, this is in the context of a disciple, which is a person that is in a process of trying to be of service to the world. And the main aim of the life of a disciple is to be of service to the world in whatever place karma puts him. So the Master says, if you really want to help people, you have to be able to understand them. And you can only understand the person when you can look at the person without your own ideas, without your own prejudices. How are you going to understand the person when you think that your ideas are better than his or hers? So the first thing that if we are going to be able to help, the first thing that we have to be able to is see what the person is, regardless of our life, of our ideas, of our aspirations. So the Master says, there are many things that may be childish from your point of view, that may seem silly, but those things may be useful for that person, and maybe the only thing that helps the person. For example, probably most of us don't believe in a very personal view of God. And then if we encounter a person that has a belief in a very, very personal God, and we try to destroy that image in the person, we may be destroying all that was a source of inspiration to that person in the name of a highest truth, and we may leave the person with nothing, because what we have to offer may not be useful at all for that person. That person may not see the point or the value of what we are saying. So even if in the name of truth we destroy whatever the person has, we may be doing something really wrong to that person. So we should be able to see what the person needs and help the person from his or her point of view and not from ours. And that implies a lot of self-knowledge, a lot of keen perception, a lot of interest in the other person. Being interacting in an organization like the Theosophical Society, this is something that we encounter many times. We are constantly sharing different views. We are constantly saying that we are trying to look for whatever is truth. But at the same time, we have to learn to be careful, not to destroy whatever may be helping another person. And it's a very subtle subject, because sometimes wrong views may be doing more ill than good effect on a person. May be worse. But that's what the Master says. If you are going to be able to help, you have to be free of any prejudice, of any bigotry. And then you are going to be able to see what is the right action or the right word for that particular situation or that particular person. And that's more or less about the point of tolerance. The other point is cheerfulness. One thing that the Master repeats there is that we should bear our karma cheerfully, taking the suffering that comes, the Master says, as an honor. That's a difficult way to, or something difficult for us to see usually. The Master says, you should take as an honor any suffering that comes to you. And again, this is in the context of what these qualifications are for. The idea is that as we develop as souls, at the beginning of our growth as souls, since we don't know, since we are deep in spiritual ignorance, most of our actions will be wrong from an absolute point of view. Will be selfish or will be, aggressive, mainly because we are immature. So they are not wrong in a moral sense, but they, for example, it's like a child. A child would tend to do many things wrong, not because the child is evil, just because he's growing. He doesn't know. He doesn't know that hitting a person will make the person hurt. Or so during the early stages of evolution, there is a law that is related to karma that is holding up the evil causes that we produce as human beings, because the purpose of karma is not to punish, is to teach, to develop. So in a person with no understanding, when suffering comes, if too much suffering comes to a person that has no understanding, that suffering, the only thing that produces is resentment, and it would crush the person. It would not produce any kind of growth. So in most of us, if not all of us, many of these causes that that will produce suffering are being held up, and as the soul grows, these causes may be worked out, and we may learn through the experience that we go through. But at the same time, these causes are retaining us from being free to break away from situations that really don't let us have a spiritual life. Most of these causes produce limitations. And many of us feel many limitations, both in our personality or the life that we lead, the jobs that we have, the responsibilities. And as the Master said, all these things are from the past, and we should go through them cheerfully and doing them as perfectly as possible. But they are limitations to do something different. So if we are going to have a completely different life, we have to pay these debts. We have to work out this karma that is obstructive for our spiritual life. So from that point of view, when a person is really earnestly treading the spiritual path, karma begins to accelerate and things begin to happen so that we can pay off these old debts and be free to do what we as spiritual beings really want to do. And you can see this in all traditions. If you read the Christian mystics, they all say, as soon as you want to really meet in your heart Jesus, you have to bear the cross, or you have to, I was reading one very interesting mystic that was a disciple of Meister Eckhart, John Toller. I don't know if the pronunciation is Toller. And he said, he was talking about a parable where a person went to a mountain to meet God, to try to listen to God. And then there was an earthquake that was breaking stones apart. And in that earthquake, God, the Lord, didn't come. Then there was a huge storm with wind and water and flood. And in that storm, the Lord didn't come. And this person was in a cave there on the mountain, suffering all these things. Then there was a fire that destroyed the whole vegetation in the mountain. And in this fire, the Lord didn't come. And then there was a still small voice. And it was in that voice that the Lord came. But the earthquake, the wind and rain and the fire were preparations purifications for this person to be able to listen to the still small voice. So Toller was saying that all those who want to meet the Lord and to listen to His voice have to go through earthquakes, and storms and fire. And you can find this in every tradition. Some people, in the New Age, there is a tendency to portray the spiritual life as if it were a pinky life with flowers everywhere, and it's not like that. Of course, there is happiness and suffering in any kind of life that we lead, but the spiritual life, from a certain point of view, is harder than the normal life. That's why most people are not leading a spiritual life. Now, why do we do it? Well, if we are sincere, it's just the result of a maturation of our soul. It's like when we are teenagers. We are with our parents, we don't have responsibilities, our mom takes care of everything, but the teenager wants to go and have his own job if he's a mature person, wants to live by himself, wants to leave behind all that. And if he asked us, is it going to be easier, this life as an adult, than the teen life? No, it's not going to be easier. It will be more complex, you will have responsibilities, you will have to work, you will have problems. Nevertheless, we do it. Why? Because we cannot stay as a teenager. Our maturity is pushing us to take the next step, even if it is harder. So the spiritual life is something like that. At the end, of course, there is all this bliss and realization of truth. But the way to get there is not necessarily very easy. But we don't have any option because we are growing. That's the natural way. So it's important to keep it in mind so that we don't expect something that is not there. So the Master said, go through whatever you have to go with this cheerfulness and taking every suffering as an honor, because it's a way for you to get rid of this obstructive karma. Then the next point is this quality of one-pointedness that says, in this particular context, is the Master says, you should be, the whole of you should be completely, you should be one with the path. That's what the Master says, which means the whole of you should be merged with your ideal. You should be leading the spiritual life because that is what you are, not because you are trying to get something through the spiritual life. Because when we are calculating to get something, then we are tempted and we hesitate. Somebody is promising me that if I follow the spiritual life, I will get this, but this material thing is also so appealing, and then we hesitate because we are not really doing what we see, what we really want to do. We should try to be honest and not to follow somebody else's ideals. We have to read all these things and think about them and try to follow the ideas that appeal to us, but always with an honesty that will help us keep our whole life going in the same direction. Because that's what one-pointedness means, that we are not doing two contradictory things. There are always some contradictions in ourselves. But if we go here one day and to the opposite direction the next day, and then we are not growing in any aspect in particular. We are not, even at the level of karma. In the book, Light on the Path, it is said, for most people, life doesn't have a very defined and clear direction because the karma that they are generating is so all over the place that it cancels itself. You know, we go one step here forward, one step backward, so we don't move. So the idea of one-pointedness is that we should do whatever we do wholeheartedly. And to do that, we have to be honest with ourselves and advance according to what we really are, to what we really see. And that will bring a higher ideal. And if we follow that, naturally that will bring a higher ideal. So in this way, I think we can be coherent with ourselves. And that's what the Master says: if you are one with the path, nothing will ever turn you away from the path, because that is what you are. And the last point is confidence. And this confidence, the Master says, there are two aspects of this. You must trust the Master, and you must trust yourself. And he says, if a person have not yet seen the Master, or meet the Master, which is the case of probably all of us, it says that person should still try to realize the Master. Now, with the Master, we shouldn't take it only in a theosophical sense. The idea of the Master is the perfect enlightened being, which is our real essence also. The Master is a proof, or an enlightened being is a proof of what we are, what we can become. Because as at the feet of the Master says, you should know that what one person has done, you are also able to do. So seeing the Master, seeing an enlightened being, is the source of inspiration, and say, this is what I am in potentially, and this is possible. And also, trusting the Master is trusting the teachings that come from wise people. Whatever, instructor or tradition we follow, if we are honest, that tradition will be a serious tradition. The teacher will have the teachings that we need to go through, and we should trust those teachings and try them and see how life is seen from that perspective. This is a balance, not when we say trust, I'm not saying you should embrace everything the person said, because we just said that we should be honest with ourselves and do whatever we can really see. So neither one extreme nor the other. Let us take the words from a person with wisdom and let us try them and see for ourselves. But if we are always hesitating about the teachings, that's usually a hindrance, because we don't do anything. We change constantly because we don't trust this or that, and many times the cause is deeper. That's an excuse not to do anything. So we constantly change. So trust the Master, and then trust yourself. The Master said, but with yourself, I'm not talking about the personal self. The Master says, you, the real you, which is a spark of God's own fire. So trust yourself in the sense of the real you, not this weak, not weak, but this shadowy image of yourself. In the feet of the Master, it says, you will say, oh, I know myself. But what you know is this shadowy aspect of yourself. You don't know your real self. So we are in a position where we don't know the Master and we don't know our real self, which are one at the level of truth. So this trust is like the bridge that, or the strength, the energy that will take us to realize the reality of the Master, or the reality of our real self, which are the same. So these are the 6 points: control of the mind, control of the action, this tolerance and open-mindedness, cheerfulness, one-pointedness, and confidence, which can point out to attitudes that will set the conditions for our spiritual perception to awaken. So now we can share different thoughts, or I can answer some questions if I can.
Questions?
I was watching the webcast,
Mm-hmm.
and it said, can we still, in our own ideas, and can we still have our own ideas, yet at the same time be tolerant of others with other views? Should a person on the spiritual path know his way and just practice tolerance towards others? Should we lead others by our actions? Could we learn something from people who we didn't think we could learn something from?
There is usually this tension between who's right, this person that is telling me something, or is it me that is right? So society, our parents, our friends, our family, they all want something from us, and they all tell us what to do. Sometimes they are looking for the best for us, and sometimes they are, society is looking just to exploit ourselves. So some people go to the other extreme. Some people say, okay, I am wise and I will do whatever I want. I don't want to listen to anybody. I was, for many years or many lives, following whatever society said, and now I will trust myself and I will do whatever I want. So I don't think neither of those extremes are useful. We should be able to listen to what other people say and should be able to think about that, to examine it. And sometimes there may be a truth there, sometimes there may not. And we should also be able to trust ourselves and also to doubt ourselves. Doubt not with the weak doubt. Doubt with the greatness of the person that is able to question himself or herself. When there is confidence, we can question ourselves. Because, of course, our view will be right from certain point of view and wrong from certain other point of view. I mean, we are not adepts, we are not enlightened beings, we are in potentially, but the way we act is not the reflection of an enlightened view. So obviously our views will be wrong from certain point of view. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to perceive truth or something that is truer than what we see. So we should get to a middle point where we can listen to other people, we can examine that free from our own prejudices, and we can listen to our thoughts and examine those also free from our own prejudices. That's why the Master says, first you have to get rid of your own prejudices and bigotry. And then when there is this really open mind, then we can question others and we can question ourselves and we can see. And then, of course, it doesn't matter who says what. If we examine something and that is something that seems true, it doesn't matter who said it, so we can learn from people that we could think that we wouldn't.
Pablo, I have a question. That the part where you spoke about the shadowy part of self, would you identify that more or less as the persona of the soul of man?
Yeah, in Theosophy we call it the personality. In psychology, many times it's called the persona. The idea of persona comes from the Greek. The actors, they had a mask that was persona through which the role that they were enacting. And the idea is that this personality, this psychophysical personality, is a role that our soul takes for this particular life. So definition is faulty. So saying shadowy, we could say limited, we could say many different things. But the idea is that this is not the whole of what we are.
Hi.
Right?
Can you tell me, how many times have you read this book? Not because of how you speak, but I read this book about a year ago, and I read this recently, and I'm sure if I read it again in 3 months or 6 months, more things are going to open up to me, and I'm amazed of how I feel the things and how when I read them and how they go through my mind. I'm just curious, how many times have you read it?
I have no idea, but I've been in the TS for more than 15 years, so I guess many times. But still, when I read it, I see more things that I haven't seen in the past. So, how many times? No idea.
Countless, right?
But it doesn't necessarily mean anything how many times we read it. I remember we did a very good exercise in a youth group that we had in Argentina, where we used to take these little books and take a paragraph and try to practice it during the week and see how we would relate to these things. And that teaches much more than just reading it, because an idea may be nice and maybe philosophically right, but then when we try to apply it, if we are honest, we say, there is no way I can apply this.
That's what I meant, not the quantity, but of how you felt it, of what went through your mind and how you can apply it.
Yeah, that's why, to me, it's very, very important to be honest and say, I trust this book, I trust that comes from a place of wisdom, but that doesn't mean that I will not question it, not because I doubt the source, but because I doubt my take on the quote. So there is a concept, and if I cannot see it, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to say it's wrong. I'm going to say, I don't see it. So keep trying to see in what way that could be applied. It could be wrong also. I'm not trying to say that it couldn't be wrong. But what I mean is that that's secondary. It's very easy to say, oh, I don't see the other side of the mountain, therefore the other side doesn't exist. That's the attitude that we have even in science. But to say something is wrong is easy. But it's a deeper attitude to say, okay, even if I think that this is right, I don't see it. So if I'm honest, I may try to keep trying and see in what way this may be right. And in that way, we learn more than by reading it. But this is one of the classic, theosophical classics, so it's something that you are constantly working on, having in your mind.
We have a question from someone online, and they wanted to know, they say they're new to Theosophy. Who are you talking about when you speak of the master?
Mm-hmm. The idea, we have a Living Theosophy on the masters that Tim gave, and I gave one of the talks when there was a blizzard. I think it was the night of the blizzard that Tim couldn't come from Chicago. So there is a lot of information in that series, and you can find it on the internet on our website in the tab that says Living Theosophy. But if I can explain it fast, the idea is that through evolution, the soul, the self, the real self, realizes its own nature. So a self that when it takes a physical body forgets its real origin, as most of us do. Through evolution, it reaches a point where it doesn't forget anymore its real nature. And that's what we call an enlightened being. In history, there have been enlightened beings in every tradition, following all kinds of systems. And the idea is that when a person reaches this state of enlightenment, it enters in a state of nirvana or moksha. Nirvana is used by Buddhists, but it's also a Hindu concept. That is a state of where all limitations and everything that is impermanent disappears. It's a dissolution of the false. And moksha means liberation. There is liberation from illusion. So, but basically, the idea is that the real self loses all contact with the illusion. In the Theosophical view, which is similar to the view of Mahayana Buddhism, some enlightened beings decide not to enter in nirvana or moksha, but instead of taking this last step that would put them away from any contact with humanity because they give up all illusory bodies or vehicles of consciousness, instead of doing that, they retain their physical bodies and their personal bodies so that they can stay in touch with humanity to help humanity in different ways. Some of them incarnate as religious teachers. Some of them teach or take a few disciples. Some of them work helping humanity on the inner planes, on the spiritual planes, let's say. It's a very complex subject. But basically, the master is an enlightened being who has decided to remain in touch with humanity out of compassion to help us, to help in our evolution, to help us realize truth. And the people who may get in touch with the master are people who want to help humanity. And usually the master, as we can see, these qualifications have to be there in the person before the master would enter in contact with him. Because only a person that has, to a certain extent, these qualifications can really help humanity. We are more or less the blind leading the blind, which doesn't mean that it's not necessary. We all can do a very valuable work. But it's like a teacher in the university is not going to teach some kid in primary school how to add or how to subtract, because it would be a waste of time. Anybody can do that. We can do that. A teacher in the university would teach people who can understand, in this example, the higher maths. So what the master does is to contact people in the world who are highly spiritual and who have this cause to help humanity in his or her heart. But that's something that we don't have to worry about. I mean, it is said when the disciple is ready, the master appears. We shouldn't turn the idea of the master into a kind of personal ambition, to get in touch with the master or something like that. But that's the general idea. I hope this is more or less enough for the time being. But as I said, go and see the whole series on the masters, and that will throw some more light.
I hope I'm not the only one tonight.
The last
Everybody
one.
knows that I'm afraid of microphones. A few minutes ago, you were speaking about compassion, and probably in the middle of your talk, you were talking about tolerance. How could you associate these two words related to the spiritual path? As our understanding goes, as you thread the path, the more purified you become naturally, if you are doing it, the right way. But it seems like for many people I have seen, as they become purified, they become extremely sensitive to certain things. And likewise, they isolate a little bit from the world and don't practice as much compassion simultaneously. So how would you manage these two things, the tolerance, compassion, and sensitivity, in our spiritual path, because they go hand by hand, and it's quite tricky, You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Some people, don't or are not aware that encountering, let us say, these cursed people, denser bodies or uncomfortable situations, heavy environments are part of, the training as well, and the flexibility. Can you just expand a little bit more? Thank you.
As we said, these are not rules that we have to follow, in the sense that we don't have to put on a costume of a spiritual person, and thinking that a spiritual person is what we think compassion or tolerance or this or that is. The idea is that each person is different, and for each person these things will develop in a different way. These are like general pointers for us to pay attention and to be open, to give it room to develop. But you can see in the spiritual world teachers that are very different in all these qualities. You have some teachers that are very patient and very kind and very seemingly compassionate, and some other teachers that seem intolerant or seem, that more emotionally explosive. And you have fake teachers, with both attitudes, and you have authentic teachers with both attitudes. So the path of development of each person, of each soul, is different. But we should always keep this and see, because if a person is aggressive in the way this person communicates with the world, it's not necessarily because that person is not tolerant. It may be that he's not tolerant, but it may be for other reasons also. You can see, for example, Krishnamurti or Nisargadatta Maharaj. These were people that many consider enlightened beings, and they weren't, or Blavatsky, and they weren't tolerant at all if we try to judge tolerance from our perspective. But they were full of love. People that were close to them, all of them vouch for the deep love that they have for humanity. So what I think is that these things talk more to inner aspects than to outer experiences or actions. So if a person is too sensitive and cannot be in certain environments, and that person has to retire from it, it's not necessarily because the person lacks in compassion. It may be that that person doesn't care about the environment and only cares about his liberation, but it may not be for that. It may be just a mechanical thing. The person is sensitive and cannot bear it. So I would say that no matter what you do or a person does outside, what is really important is why the person is doing that. If something is done with compassion or with tolerance or with sometimes a harsh word is filled with love, as any parent knows. To love the children doesn't mean that we always talk to them in a nice way or do whatever they want. So I would say that it depends on what we feel. And then we do whatever we can on the outside environment. Our personalities are a limitation on what we are. And some people are born with a very patient personality, and some other people are born with a very difficult personality. And They may be very spiritual people also, but the karma are different. So the physical plane is pretty much an illusion. Now, of course, many people use that as an excuse. Oh, I have this reaction or this shortcoming because it's a karma of my personality. Well, we can self-delude ourselves, if we want to, but I think there is no contradiction necessarily with the actions. What is important is what is inside.